I am Damian Marovich, 33 years old, living a life that has always felt both steady and hollow, like a river flowing through the chaos of New York City, but never truly belonging to it. Outwardly, I am mature and hard-working, a mid-level manager at Blackwood Corporation, a powerful conglomerate that towers over Manhattan in glass and steel. I live in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, ride the subway each day, and return each night to the same quiet routine. My salary is enough to live comfortably, but it has never been my passion, only my independence. That instinct for independence was ingrained in me since childhood back in Buffalo, a gray industrial city near the Canadian border where the winds off Lake Erie always carried with them the weight of hardship. My parents, Milan and Anna, were Balkan immigrants who fled the devastation of war in the late 1990s. They rarely spoke of the past, only muttering, "War, you don't need to know about it," with eyes that carried secrets I could never touch. I was their only child, but never spoiled. My father was a strict, silent man who worked at a steel factory, his presence more command than comfort. My mother, gentler but always tired, filled our home with the sad notes of Balkan folk songs, but grew silent whenever I asked about family or my birthday. My questions were brushed aside, and I eventually stopped asking, though the alienation lodged itself in me like a permanent shadow. At 18, I left Buffalo to study business in New York, paying my way with dishwashing shifts and coffee shop jobs. It was there I learned to survive without leaning on anyone, not even my parents. I graduated with solid grades, worked my way up at Blackwood, and became competent, reliable, but always restless, as if something essential was missing. My life passed in gray routine, until I met Samantha, a doctor with curly brown hair and a smile that illuminated even the darkest day. We met in a coffee shop when she helped me after I spilled my drink, and from that small accident grew a love that became my anchor. 2 years ago, I proposed on a bridge in Central Park, and she said yes, her eyes bright with certainty. For the first time, I felt the possibility of belonging. Yet even Samantha, with all her warmth, could not quiet the unease in me. She often urged me to call my parents, reminding me they were aging, but the thought of those empty conversations left me cold. Her family had been open and affectionate, something I could not explain to her because I had never known it myself. I tried to ignore the past, burying myself in work and long runs along the Hudson River. But the ghosts never left. I remembered my mother's trembling voice when I once asked if I had siblings, her denial unconvincing, and the whispered conversations I overheard late at night. My life might have gone on indefinitely in that numb rhythm, if not for one call that shattered everything. It came on a busy evening at the office. My father, Milan, had been in an accident and was at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan. Panic drove me into a taxi, the neon lights of the city blurring as I sped through the streets. At the hospital, Samantha met me in her green scrubs, pale but steady, and explained that my father's injuries were severe. He needed a transfusion, but his blood type was rare AB negative. Without hesitation, I agreed to donate. A nurse drew my blood, but when Samantha returned with the results, her face was ashen, her voice trembling as she told me the unthinkable. My blood type was O positive. The urgent DNA compatibility test showed something else. I was not biologically related to my father at all. Her words echoed like a thunderclap. Not his son. The fragments of memory, the silences, the evasions, suddenly rearranged into a terrifying possibility. My phone buzzed, my mother's name flashing on the screen. When I answered, her voice was frantic, demanding to know about my father. I told her he was in surgery and urged her to come at once. As I hung up, the weight of the secret pressed harder than ever. My life, my identity, everything I had known was unraveling, and I felt myself standing at the threshold of a truth that could destroy me. The hospital waiting room was drenched in sterile light, and I paced its length as though movement could hold me together. Samantha tried to calm me, her hand warm on my shoulder, but the chaos in my mind drowned out everything. My father's life hung in the balance, and yet all I could think about was the test result, no genetic link. If he was not my father, then who was I? Hours passed like years before my mother finally arrived, worn from the long night bus ride, her coat dusty and her eyes swollen with worry. She rushed to embrace me, but I stood rigid, unable to respond. She searched my face, sensing something wrong, her voice trembling as she asked about Milan. I told her he was still in surgery, his condition uncertain. But I could no longer hold back. With a steadiness, I did not feel I asked the question that had consumed me since Samantha handed me the paper. I am not your and Dad's biological child, am I? The words sliced through the air, and my mother froze. Her hands tightened around her purse, her eyes filling with panic. She tried to deny it, stammering, but her silence betrayed her. Tears broke from her eyes, and finally in a broken voice she admitted what I had long suspected. I was not their natural son. She wept, saying she had never wanted me to know, that she feared losing me if the truth came out. She told me I had been found during the war, a newborn abandoned in the rubble of a bombed hospital. She claimed no one came for me, that she believed I was a gift from God and raised me as her own because she and Milan could not have children. I listened, numb, torn between pity and rage. Her story sounded more like a fable than truth, a convenient veil for something darker. Why had there been no reports, no search for my real family? Why did they always keep me at a distance? I pressed her, demanding the whole truth, but she collapsed into sobs and begged me to stop. I left the hospital without another word, the corridors closing in on me, Samantha calling after me as I disappeared into the night. Back in Brooklyn, I sat in my apartment staring at old family photographs, the images of birthdays and graduations now feeling like evidence of a deception. My mother's story gnawed at me. Had I truly been found in rubble, or was there something else? I opened my laptop and began searching. The Balkan Wars of the early 90s were chaos bombings, massacres, streams of refugees. But what chilled me most were reports of children who had vanished from hospitals, infants taken in the confusion, some adopted illegally, others used by families to forge refugee papers for safe passage to the West. My hands shook as I read that some couples who could not conceive had seized children creating false birth certificates to gain entry to America. The possibility tore at me. Was I one of those stolen children? My parents' silence, their evasions, their distance all began to fit. I felt both fury and grief, as if the foundation of my life had collapsed beneath me. I began contacting refugee organizations, combing archives and sending inquiries to the Red Cross and human rights groups. Days blurred as I sat hunched over my computer, tracing threads through decades-old reports. One message hit me like a blow. Records existed of children missing from a hospital in Sarajevo, Bosnia, in August 1992, the month and year of my supposed birth. Among the cases was a newborn boy whose parents had fled in desperation after a bombing. The description was vague, but a note mentioned that the parents were prominent in their community and had later immigrated to the United States. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. Could they be my real parents? I sought out survivors, contacting NGOs in Queens that still supported Balkan refugees. An aging nurse named Elena agreed to meet me at a cafe. Her face was lined with the memories of war, and her voice trembled as she recounted the chaos at the Sarajevo hospital. She remembered a young couple who lost their newborn son during a night of bombing, only to find the crib empty when they returned. They were devastated, she said, and she believed they had later left for America. Her eyes lingered on me, heavy with sympathy, as I asked for names, but she could not remember. She gave me a contact for a retired doctor who had also worked there and urged me to keep searching, though she warned that truth could wound more than lies. I returned home with my head spinning. Each clue pulled me closer to a revelation I both longed for and dreaded. If the prominent couple had been my real parents, then who were Milan and Anna to me, Kidnappers, desperate survivors who had used me as their ticket to freedom. I thought of my mother's tears, her lullabies, the meals she cooked, and the years she sacrificed for me. Could I condemn her? Yet the thought that another family had mourned me for decades left me shaking. Samantha urged me to stay calm, reminding me that I was still myself, regardless of bloodlines. But I could not let it go. I needed proof, no matter what it cost. The breakthrough came a week later. A Red Cross report from 1992 confirmed that a couple named Ivan and Katerina had lost a newborn son at the Sievo Hospital in August of that year. They had later immigrated to the United States, building a new life from ashes. When I saw their last name, my breath caught in my throat. Blackwood. Ivan and Katerina Blackwood, founders of the very corporation where I had worked for years. My pulse thundered as I stared at their photo in an old article. The resemblance was faint but undeniable, their eyes carrying a familiarity that made my skin crawl. Could it be true? Had I, without knowing, been working under my own parents' legacy all along? The revelation haunted me like a fever. Ivan and Katerina Blackwood, names I had seen countless times on company reports and shareholder meetings and on plaques in the headquarters lobby, might be my real parents. For 33 years, I had walked beneath their shadow, unaware that their blood could run through my veins. The coincidence was too sharp to dismiss. The Red Cross report listed Sievo Hospital, August 1992, the exact time and place my mother had claimed she found me. But if my father had taken me forged documents and built our immigration story on that theft, then my entire life was stolen, not only from me, but from them as well. I knew I needed proof beyond paper and coincidence. My mind churned through possibilities until I settled on the only way forward. As a mid-level manager at Blackwood Corporation, I had access to the upper offices from time to time. If I could arrange a meeting with Ivan, I could perhaps collect something, a coffee cup, a used tissue for DNA testing. It was risky, even invasive, but the need for truth outweighed everything. I drafted a report on process improvements, polished it to catch leadership's interest, and submitted a request for a short meeting. To my astonishment, the assistant scheduled me for a Wednesday morning at the Manhattan headquarters. Those 3 days leading up to the meeting felt endless. I rehearsed what I might say, how I might look for clues in their expressions, how I would control the storm boiling inside me. Samantha urged caution, her voice steady on the phone, reminding me not to leap to conclusions without science. On the morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully, my hands trembling as I tied my knot. I carried with me not just charts and graphs, but the weight of my identity, the ache of a life unraveling. The top floor of the Blackwood building glittered with panoramic views of the city. When I entered, Ivan stood tall, silver-haired, his deep eyes weary yet sharp. Beside him sat Katerina, her brown hair streaked with gray, her posture composed, yet her smile tinged with sadness. They greeted me politely, and I began my presentation. My voice stumbled at first, but steadied as I focused on the slides, all the while studying them in stolen glances. Their gestures felt hauntingly familiar, the way Ivan furrowed his brow in concentration, the way Katerina tilted her head as though weighing every word. I saw pieces of myself reflected back, and the realization made my pulse race. When the meeting ended, I thanked them and began gathering my documents. Ivan left his coffee cup on the table, and as they departed, I slipped it into my bag under the guise of tidying up. My heart pounded as though I had committed a crime, but I told myself this was the only way to uncover what decades of silence had buried. I sent the cup and my own blood sample to a private DNA lab. The waiting gnawed at me, each hour dragging into eternity. I read old interviews with Ivan and Katerina, one where Katerina spoke of the child they had lost during the war. We lost the light of our lives. She had said, her voice recorded in print, not a day goes by that we don't think of our boy. I closed the laptop, my chest tightening with grief. Had I been that boy? Had I been their Marco, stolen in the night and raised under another name? A week later, the results arrived. My hands shook as I opened the email. The screen blurred with tears before I forced myself to focus on the words, a 99.9% probability that I was the biological son of Ivan Blackwood. The world tilted beneath me. It was true. I was their child. I sank into my chair, trembling with emotions too tangled to name. Relief, sorrow, anger, and fear collided inside me. For years, Ivan and Katerina had funded organizations that searched for missing children of the Balkan War. Perhaps they had been searching for me all along while I worked in their company as just another anonymous employee. Samantha came over that night, her eyes widening when I showed her the report. She hugged me, whispering that this was a miracle, that I had found the truth. But all I felt was the weight of impossible choices. Ivan and Katerina were my real parents, yet Anna had raised me with lullabies and worn hands, and Milan, strict though he was, had fed and clothed me. Could I condemn them now? Could I forgive? I decided to meet Ivan and Katerina again, this time, not as an employee, but as a son. I rehearsed the words endlessly, but they always stuck in my throat. How do you tell someone you are the child they lost 3 decades ago? How do you bridge a lifetime of absence in a single breath? The night before the meeting, I barely slept, staring at the ceiling, clutching the folded DNA results in my pocket like a fragile key to everything I'd ever wanted to know. When morning came, I stood outside the gleaming Blackwood building, staring up at the glass that reflected the gray Manhattan sky. My heart pounded as I stepped into the elevator, each floor bringing me closer to a moment that could change everything. I thought of my mother's tears, of my father in his hospital bed, of Samantha's voice telling me I was still Damien no matter what name I carried. And yet when the doors opened on the top floor, I felt as though I was walking toward the truth that would rewrite my life forever. The top floor office was quiet when I stepped inside the city, sprawling behind the wide glass windows. Ivan looked up from behind his desk, offering a polite smile, while Katerina turned from the window where she had been watching the skyline. They greeted me warmly, expecting another discussion about numbers and processes, but I could no longer keep up the facade. My pulse hammered as I pulled the folded DNA results from my pocket, the paper damp with sweat. My voice shook as I told them this wasn't about work, that it was personal, something that had haunted me my entire life. They exchanged puzzled glances, but their faces froze when I finally said it. I thought I might be their son. The air grew heavy, as if time itself paused. Katerina's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Ivan's brow furrowed, his voice sharp as he demanded clarity. I placed the DNA report on the desk, my words tumbling out. I told them I had been born in Sievo in August 1992, raised by Balkan immigrants in Buffalo, and only recently discovered that my parents were not biologically mine. I explained how my father had been injured in an accident, how a DNA test done during the hospital crisis revealed the truth, and how I had uncovered records of a missing newborn boy from the Sievo hospital. Their boy. My hands trembled as I pushed the paper toward them. The results showed a 99.9% probability of paternity between Ivan Blackwood and me. Katerina's sobs broke the silence first. She clutched the paper with shaking hands, her tears spilling freely. Marco, she whispered, calling me by a name that felt foreign yet strangely right. My son, my Marco. She rushed to embrace me, and I stood frozen as her arms wrapped tightly around me, her voice breaking as she told me how they had searched for me every day for 33 years. Ivan remained still, at first his eyes red, his lips pressed tight as though he was afraid to believe. But then he stepped forward, his hand gripping my shoulder, his deep voice faltering as he whispered, "You are our son." For a moment I felt caught between worlds. Katerina's tears soaked my shoulder. Ivan's hand trembled against me, and all I could think about was my mother Anna's sobs in that hospital hallway when she confessed to the lie. I wanted to surrender to this embrace, to reclaim the life stolen from me, but I couldn't. I pulled back, my voice breaking, as I told them everything, how my adoptive father had taken me from Sievo forged documents to enter America, and how my mother had gone along with it out of desperation and infertility. Their faces shifted from wonder to anguish to fury as they listened. Katerina gripped my hand, her voice trembling with pain, saying those people had stolen not just me, but their entire life as a family. Ivan's face hardened, his jaw tight as he vowed they would seek justice for what had been done. The word justice struck me like a knife. I thought of Anna, of her clumsy hugs, the lullabies she sang in a trembling voice, the meals she cooked while her hands were raw from sewing. For all her lies, she had raised me. She had been my mother. Could I stand by while the Blackwoods pressed charges that would destroy her? My heart was torn in two, each side pulling me with equal force. Katerina saw the conflict in my eyes and softened her voice gentler. She said they understood I was torn, that I had grown up with another family, but they begged me not to let the crime be buried in silence. "We lost you once," she said, "and we will not lose you again." I left their office, trembling, the DNA results clutched in my pocket, the city rain hitting my face as if to wash away the storm within me. Samantha met me that evening, and I told her everything. She held my hand, her voice calm but firm, reminding me that no matter what happened, I was still Damien, the man she loved. But I knew this truth had changed everything. I could not pretend to be only Damien anymore, nor could I step fully into the role of Marco Blackwood. I was both and neither, and I had to decide what to do with the knowledge that now defined me. In the days that followed, Ivan and Katerina reached out, often asking me to visit their Long Island home, introducing me to relatives who had mourned me as if I had died. They wanted me to reclaim the name Marco, to step into their world of wealth and legacy. But every time I thought of embracing that life, I remembered Anna's weary eyes, Milan's stern commands, the tiny house in Buffalo where I had grown up. That world was built on lies, yet it was still mine. I couldn't turn away from it so easily, even knowing what I knew now. The decision weighed on me until I finally realized I could not avoid facing Anna again. I had to hear her side one more time, had to decide whether she was a kidnapper complicit in a crime or a desperate woman clinging to a child she thought was abandoned. Samantha urged me to confront her, saying closure would not come from silence. And so I returned to the hospital where my father still lay, weak and fading, determined to demand the truth one final time. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic, the hum of machines, and the shuffle of footsteps echoing around me as I walked toward my father's room. He lay frail and pale, barely conscious, his breathing shallow. My mother sat beside him, her hands wrapped around his, her eyes hollow from exhaustion and grief. When she saw me enter, she stood, relief flickering across her face, though it was quickly clouded by fear. "Damien," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You came." I gestured for her to step outside, unable to have this conversation under my father's weak gaze. Reluctantly, she followed me into the dim hallway, her shoulders hunched as though she already knew what was coming. I looked into her weary eyes and spoke with a firmness I had never managed before. I told her I had found my real parents, Ivan and Katerina Blackwood, and that they knew everything. Her lips parted in shock, then quivered as tears welled. She tried to protest, but I cut her off, demanding that she confirm what I already knew, that my father had taken me from the Cievo hospital during the war, forging documents to claim me as their child. She collapsed onto a chair, sobbing, her voice breaking as she finally confessed. Yes, Milan had taken me. She said she had begged him not to, but he insisted it was the only way for them to escape the war and start anew. They had nothing, and she had been barren, unable to bear children. He told her I was alone, abandoned, that my real parents had surely died in the bombings. She admitted she wanted to believe him, and when she held me for the first time, her heart had given in. She raised me with love, even though she knew the foundation of that life was a lie. Her words pierced me like knives. I wanted to scream, to rage at her for letting me live 33 years with a false identity, but her tears, raw and desperate, reminded me of the countless nights she had stayed awake sewing to pay bills, of her voice singing lullabies in the dark. I love you, she whispered, clutching at my arm. You are my son. I know what we did was wrong, but I couldn't let you go. Please don't let them destroy us. I pulled back, torn between fury and pity. The Blackwoods had begged for justice, but this broken woman before me was still the mother who had raised me. Could I condemn her to prison after everything? I told her that the truth was no longer hidden, that she could not escape it. If she wanted any hope of forgiveness from me, she had to face it openly, to turn herself in. She wept bitterly, begging me to reconsider, but at last she nodded, her voice faint. I'll do it. For you, if that's what it takes. It was not relief I felt, but a dull ache in my chest, as though I'd cut out a part of myself to survive. My father never heard this exchange. Days later, before charges could even be considered, his body gave out, and he passed quietly in the night. He carried his secrets with him, leaving my mother to bear the consequences alone. True to her word, my mother went to the Buffalo police station and confessed everything. She described how Milan had taken me from the hospital crib during the bombings, how he forged documents to bring me to America, and how she had remained silent out of fear and love. The court showed some leniency due to the chaos of war and her voluntary confession. She received probation instead of prison, spared only because decades had passed and because she had raised me without abuse or neglect. I sat in the courtroom watching her trembling voice recount the crime and felt something in me fracture. She was guilty, yes, but she was also the woman who had kissed my forehead when I was ill, who had clutched my hand on my first day of school. Love and betrayal intertwined until I could no longer separate them. Meanwhile, Ivan and Katerina reached out with open arms. They embraced me as their lost son, insisting I reclaim the name Marco and rejoin the family they had built. They had spent 33 years mourning me, searching funding organizations to find missing children, never knowing I was alive under their very roof. Their grief was real, their love undeniable. But I hesitated. How could I erase Damian Marovich, the identity I had carried my whole life, even if it was built on lies? They wanted justice. But I had already seen my mother broken by confession and spared by mercy. They struggled to accept my reluctance, but eventually Katerina, her eyes still brimming with tears, told me that whatever I chose, I was still her son. I traveled once more to Buffalo, to the small peeling house that had been my world. My mother sat in her worn armchair, her face tired but soft when she saw me. She whispered that she didn't expect forgiveness, only that I live a better life than she'd given me. I took her hand, feeling her bones fragile beneath her skin, and told her that I forgave her, though I could never forget. Tears blurred my vision as I stood in that house, realizing that love and guilt can live in the same heart, that sometimes forgiveness is not absolution, but a way to let yourself move forward. The weeks after my mother's confession felt like walking through fog. I moved between two worlds, the quiet sorrow of Buffalo, where my mother lived out her probation, and the powerful orbit of the Blackwoods, who welcomed me into their home with love I barely knew how to receive. Ivan and Katerina hosted gatherings where relatives I had never met embraced me as though I had always belonged. They called me Marco, tears glistening as they spoke the name as if breathing life back into a ghost. I smiled politely, but deep inside I wrestled with a storm. For 33 years I had been Damien, shaped by hardship, silence, and a woman who had lied yet loved. Could I suddenly shed that skin and become Marco, heir to a legacy of power and wealth? Ivan pressed harder than Katerina. His voice thundered with righteous anger whenever he spoke of Milan, and Anna insisting they had stolen decades from all of them. He wanted court battles headlines, punishment. But the system had already spoken. Milan was gone, and Anna had received probation. Justice, imperfect as it was, had been delivered. Katerina, softer but just as wounded, told me she simply wanted me in their lives not as an employee, but as a son. She said she had no desire to erase Damien, only to know Marco was alive and would not vanish again. Her words struck deeper than Ivan's demands, for they carried not fury, but the simple ache of a mother who had mourned too long. Samantha stood by me through it all, her steady presence anchoring me when my emotions threatened to drag me under. One evening, sitting beside me on the sofa of my Brooklyn apartment, she said something I will never forget. "You are both Damien and Marco. You don't have to choose one over the other. What matters is what you build from here." Her words opened a door inside me I hadn't known was locked. For so long I'd felt forced to pick loyalty to the woman who raised me or to the parents who lost me. But maybe my identity wasn't a coin toss. Maybe it was a bridge. I began to spend more time with the Blackwoods, not as an heir, but as a son, slowly rediscovering a family he never knew he had. They invited me to their Long Island home, where Katerina cooked meals that reminded me faintly of Anna's, though more refined, more carefully presented. She would sometimes stare at me while I ate, tears welling in her eyes, whispering that she still couldn't believe I'd been returned to them. Ivan, though less openly emotional, began to soften as well, asking me about my life in Buffalo, about the nights I worked, dishwashing shifts to pay for college, about the struggles that had carved me into the man before him. For the first time, I realized they didn't just want Marco back. They wanted to know Damien too. But I never abandoned Anna. I visited Buffalo regularly, sitting with her in the small living room where she would stroke my hand and apologize again and again. I told her to stop apologizing, that what was done could not be undone, but that I needed her to live with honesty now. We sat in silence more often than we spoke, yet the silence felt different, no longer evasive, but weighted with recognition. We both knew the truth, and there was no need for lies anymore. Months passed, and slowly the chaos settled. I continued my work at Blackwood Corporation, not as a legacy son, but as a man who had earned his position. I began preparing for a future with Samantha, our wedding plans, small but full of meaning. When Ivan and Katerina offered to fund a lavish ceremony, I declined gently, telling them I needed to build my own life, just as I always had. They understood, though. I saw the longing in their eyes to give me everything I had missed. One evening, standing at a Blackwood family gathering, I lifted a glass under the setting sun. Around me were people who had searched for me, mourned me, and welcomed me back. At my side stood Samantha, her hand warm in mine, and in my heart lived Anna Broken, but still my mother. I realized then that I was not the victim of two families, but the product of both. The love that raised me, flawed though it was, and the love that searched for me across decades were both real. My identity was not a choice between Damien and Marco. It was the truth that I was both, and from that truth I could finally move forward. If there is a lesson in my story, it is this family is not defined only by blood, nor only by who raises you. It is defined by love, by forgiveness, and by the courage to face truth, no matter how painful. Sometimes the past is built on lies, but that does not mean the future must be. If my journey has moved you, please remember to like this video, share it with others who might need hope, subscribe for more stories, and leave a comment about what family means to you.